You'll listen to a clip here from Authentic Happiness that discusses the concept of the hedonic treadmill. This hedonic
Psychologists
treadmill
wonder if each
holds
of
the
us has our
key
own
to our
personal set
happiness.
range for happiness, a fixed and largely inherited level to which we invariably revert. The bad news is that, like a thermostat, this set range will drag our happiness back down to its usual level when too much good fortune comes our way. A systematic study of 22 people who won major lotteries found that they reverted to their baseline level of happiness over time, winding up no happier than 22 match controls. The good news, however, is that after misfortune strikes, the thermostat will strive to pull us out of our misery eventually. In fact, depression is almost always episodic, with recovery occurring within a few months of onset. Another barrier to raising your level of happiness is the hedonic treadmill, which causes you to rapidly and inevitably adapt to good things by taking them for granted. As you accumulate more material possessions and accomplishments, your expectations rise. The deeds and things you work so hard for no longer make you happy. You need to get something even better to boost your level of happiness into the upper reaches of its set range. But once you get the next possession or achievement, you adapt to it as well, and so on. There is, unfortunately, a good deal of evidence for such a treadmill. If there were no treadmill, people who get more good things in life would in general be much happier than the less fortunate. But the less fortunate are, by and large, just as happy as the more fortunate. Good things and high accomplishments, studies have shown, have astonishingly little power to raise happiness more than transiently. In less than 3 months, major events, such as being fired or promoted, lose their impact on happiness levels. Wealth, which surely brings more possessions in its wake, has a surprisingly low correlation with happiness level. Rich people are, on average, only slightly happier than poor people. Real income has risen dramatically in the prosperous nations over the last half-century, but the level of life satisfaction has been entirely flat in the United States and most other wealthy nations.
The next clip is from the book The Happiness Hypothesis by John Haidt.
Misguided pursuits. An axiom of economics is that people pursue their interests more or less rationally, and that's what makes markets work. Adam Smith's invisible hand of self-interest. But in the 1980s, a few economists began studying psychology and messing up the prevailing models. Leading the way was the Cornell economist Robert Frank, whose 1987 book, Passions Within Reason, analyzed some of the things people do that just don't fit into economic models of pure self-interest, such as tipping in restaurants when far from home, seeking costly revenge, and staying loyal to friends and spouses when better opportunities come along. Frank argued that these behaviors make sense only as products of moral emotions, such as love, shame, vengeance, or guilt, and these moral emotions make sense only as products of evolution. Evolution seems to have made us strategically irrational at times for our own good. For example, a person who gets angry when cheated and who will pursue vengeance regardless of the cost earns a reputation that discourages would-be cheaters. A person who pursued vengeance only when the benefits outweighed the costs could be cheated with impunity in many situations. In his more recent book, Luxury Fever, Frank used the same approach to understand another kind of irrationality, the vigor with which people pursue many goals that work against their own happiness. Frank begins with the question of why, as nations rise in wealth, their citizens become no happier, and he considers the possibility that once basic needs are met, money simply cannot buy additional happiness. After a careful review of the evidence, however, Frank concludes that those who think money can't buy happiness just don't know where to shop. Some purchases are much less subject to the adaptation principle. Frank wants to know why people are so devoted to spending money on luxuries and other goods to which they adapt completely, rather than on things that would make them lastingly happier. For example, people would be happier and healthier if they took more time off and spent it with their family and friends. Yet America has long been heading in the opposite direction. People would be happier if they reduced their commuting time, even if it meant living in smaller houses. Yet American trends are toward ever larger houses and ever longer commutes. People would be happier and healthier if they took longer vacations, even if that meant earning less. Yet vacation times are shrinking in the United States and in Europe as well. People would be happier and, in the long run, wealthier if they bought basic, functional appliances, automobiles, and wristwatches, and invested the money they saved for future consumption. Yet Americans, in particular, spend almost everything they have, and sometimes more, on goods for present consumption, often paying a large premium for designer names and superfluous features. Frank's explanation is simple. Conspicuous and inconspicuous consumption follow different psychological rules. Conspicuous consumption refers to things that are visible to others and that are taken as markers of a person's relative success. These goods are subject to a kind of arms race, where their value comes not so much from their objective properties as from the statement they make about their owner. When everyone wore Timex watches, the first person in the office to buy a Rolex stood out. When everyone moved up to Rolex, it took a $20,000 Patek Philippe to achieve high status, and a Rolex no longer gave as much satisfaction. Conspicuous consumption is a zero-sum game. Each person's move up devalues the possessions of others. Furthermore, it's difficult to persuade an entire group or subculture to ratchet down, even though everyone would be better off, on average, if they all went back to simple watches. Inconspicuous consumption, on the other hand, refers to goods and activities that are valued for themselves, that are usually consumed more privately, and that are not bought for the purpose of achieving status. Because Americans, at least, gain no prestige from taking the longest vacations or having the shortest commutes, these inconspicuous consumables are not subject to an arms race. Just try this thought experiment. Which job would you rather have? One in which you earn $90,000 a year and your co-workers earn on average $70,000? Or one in which you earn $100,000, but your co-workers earned on average $150,000. Many people choose the first job, thereby revealing that relative position is worth at least $10,000 to them. Now, try this one. Would you rather work for a company that gave you 2 weeks of vacation a year, but other employees were given on average only 1? Or would you prefer a company that gave you 4 weeks of vacation a year, but other employees were given on average 6? The great majority of people choose the longer absolute time. Time off is inconspicuous consumption, although people can easily turn a vacation into conspicuous consumption by spending vast amounts of money to impress others, instead of using the time to rejuvenate themselves. Frank's conclusions are bolstered by recent research on the benefits of doing versus having.